We can do it. Yes, we can. We can change things throughout the land. But we all must lend a hand. We can do it. Oh, yes, we can. Oh, your neighbor over there.
Welcome to Changing Our World, North Shore Citizens in Action. My name is Linda Weltner and I'm your host. And this morning we have as our guest Nikki Gamer. Now that name may be familiar to you. It's a byline that you see in the Marblehead Reporter. And Nikki has just come back from a visit to Africa where she got to see her counterpart in a South African newspaper. So welcome, Nikki. I'm glad to have you here.
I'm honored to be a guest.
And how did this come about?
I like to think of myself as very interested in traveling. And Natabe had come to Marblehead. Natabe is my counterpart in Africa in a township. She works for a small newspaper in a township south of Johannesburg. She had come to Marblehead with a Rotary delegation. So I had met her briefly. Fraffy Welch led the charge. We all know Fraffy. And I had met her briefly. I'd always wanted to go to Africa, and I'd always wanted to see how news was reported outside of the United States, because I know we do things very differently here than in other parts of the world. So I thought to myself, you know, Natabe was such a warm personality, and she had offered, she said, if any of you guys want to come visit, my home is open. So
that's a dangerous thing to say.
To me it is. I'm the kind of person, you don't want to offer me those things because I'll take you up on it, even in Africa. I decided to plan my trip around visiting Natabe and seeing her newsroom, and went about getting there.
But the way you went about getting there was through 6 other African countries.
Right.
So where else did you go?
I did the Southern Circle. So I started in Johannesburg, flew into Johannesburg, and went to Botswana. So it goes Botswana, Zimbabwe, then Zambia, and then Malawi and Mozambique, and back to South Africa.
And that's when you were on your own. You were on a trip, but it wasn't one of these National Geographic 4-star hotel things. Tell me how you traveled.
Right, I'm not. I wish I had that kind of money, but
no, you don't.
No, I kind of like
don't.
doing it rough. But there was 3 other travelers. One is my boyfriend came with me.
So it was only 4 on a.
Yeah,
ooh,
we were
nice.
in this little 4-wheeler, and we had this South African guide named Raz. And then there was a woman from Ireland and a woman from Holland. And we were together for 23 days, and we camped in the wild during a lot of these. So set up a tent and plunked ourselves down, which was a whole adventure.
And your guide prepared the food?
Yeah, so we ate a lot of pasta. It was definitely not your typical safari. You know, it wasn't roughing it either as much. You know, we had a guide, so it wasn't like we were driving ourselves.
It's not like you could accidentally wander into some place where you shouldn't be. I think that's to have someone who knows the road.
And especially when you're doing, you're going from country to country, and these border crossings, you know, we were told that it can be a little sketchy. So we were lucky that, you know, our guide knew how to get us through the border crossings, and which could be a little chaotic. Some of the border crossings, you would have lines for hours of people just waiting to get across the border.
And he could get you across more quickly.
And he could get us in quickly.
I wonder where the money passed hands.
I do too. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, he definitely knew the guards.
The techniques, yeah.
Techniques.
And you stopped at Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe?
Yes, yes. Talk about one of the most fantastic sights of your life. You know, you could see the spray, you know, 7 Wonder of the World.
I read somewhere that there are moonbows if you go out at night in the moonlight.
Interesting. Oh, from the spray.
It's from the spray.
Yeah. Well, you can see the spray a good mile away. It's that spectacular.
But you said that it was not, there weren't a lot of people around.
There's 2 ways you can get to Victoria Falls. One is through Zambia, and one is through Zimbabwe. And in Zimbabwe, what I found was really sad is that the way the government's gone in the last, I don't know, 10 years at least with their leadership, there's just no infrastructure. And, you know, you go to a wonder of the world and you expect it, it's a major tourist destination, and you expect it to be, you know, there were no maps. We weren't given maps upon entering the national park. There were the rails were deteriorating. It really just seemed like it was run down. And that really was sad to me, because I thought, you know, what a way to get people into your
tourist
country.
dollars, right.
It was just really run down, and the people just looked downtrodden, you know.
And did you say something, you went to eat at a pizza shop?
Yeah, so we had gone, you know, we were looking for lunch that day, and there was a pizza shop. It was the most glitziest, you know, we think of pizza shops around here, you know, they're a dime a dozen, but there it was like the place. And so we went and we got a slice of pizza, and the thing that surprised me was that they had a guard outside guarding the pizza shop, because they had so many robberies of this pizza shop that they needed, you know, a security guard, which I guess surprised me, not really, you know, haven't traveled extensively in the developing world.
Maybe to keep away beggars as well, do you think?
Yeah, I think so.
When you have a large impoverished population, you know, they're just trying to survive.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then, after this wonderful travel and sightseeing, you go to Johannesburg and you hook up with Natabe.
We're about the same age, and we both have essentially the same job. You know, she's an editor for a newspaper there. I write for our paper. I just thought how different she must be. I didn't really know her. I didn't know what to expect when she had come to my hostel to pick me up. We had arranged for a pickup, and when she came to pick me up, I left the hostel doors with my backpack on, and she drives in, and she is driving the same exact car that I drive here. It was very bizarre, a silver Volkswagen Rabbit. And I said to myself, how, you know, that started with my paradigm shift of how things can be so similar yet so different in Africa.
Sort of believe a little bit in psychic coincidences, but she was brought here to Marblehead, and maybe that was the sign that the two of you were meant to get together.
I know. And, you know, she has this unbelievable spirit. You meet, you know, there's certain people that just are alive, and she's one of those people. She's a feisty woman, you know, she's got a lot to say. She writes intelligently. And
did she go to college?
Yes.
She works for something called the Val Weekly. How is that area? Of course, Marblehead's so small, but how does that area compare with your paper?
The Val Triangle, you know, we're talking, I don't know the population, but we're talking tens of thousands of people that in the community that she covers.
Right, and it's all black.
All black, and they speak about at least 6 different languages, different tribal languages. So all the reporters on staff there, they can switch from English to Afrikaner, which is, you know, from the Dutch.
Yeah.
And then, you know, about 5 of their tribal languages in the area. That to me was so impressive, because when they're out doing stories, you know, when I go to do a story, it's English, you know, and sometimes Spanish, if rarely, not in this job anyway.
Yeah.
But they, you know, they have to know to communicate. And then it's just a lot more crime. You know, Marblehead, it's such a, you know, you have issues. You have really serious issues. But, you know, one of the biggest issues in South Africa is crime. And you have a lot of gun violence.
And you found something shocking about the way the newspaper handles that, right?
Yeah, well, you know, right. We tend to treat what we put in the paper with a sort of sensitive eye, I want to say. There's a lot of, you know, we really have to think about sensitivity.
Yeah, like our kids are going to see this.
Right, and there, you know, they, every day people are dying, and they put those pictures.
Violently dying.
Violently dying. And there are some really, really shocking images that you'll see in
Can
those
you think of one?
Oh, goodness. I remember talking to a reporter who had covered, you know, it was a ritualistic thing where, you know, to be men, they have to go and do this rite of passage where they go into the woods and they I think they have to get naked, or I don't know what the specific ritual was, but this gentleman had gone up there and naked, and there was some violence that ensued. He was beaten horribly. I don't know the scenario, but they put that picture on the paper of him.
So was all the staff black?
The reporters were black. The management was white. So there was that sort of. But Natabe was the manager, too, and she was black. So.
And she was, in a position of administration.
She was in a position of administration and power,
Yeah.
She writes columns.
And were they friendly?
Oh, yeah. They were so excited to host me. I will forever be grateful for very friendly.
And you noticed something interesting about the difference between the races and how they handle that socially in South Africa.
Yeah, I think here, we've, since sort of our desegregation of the schools, and we've come a long way since the 60s in terms of how we define race, especially in the last year with a black president.
Yeah.
But I think we tend to be really politically correct, and there's a lot of subversive racism going on. Or in South Africa, this is 20 years of apartheid ending, and they're still very segregated. At least that's, to me, experiencing it, it seemed very segregated. I'm no expert on their society and culture, but they talk about things, you're black, you're white, you're colored, it's very blatant. It's not blatant, it's just out in the open.
Right.
And it is racist, but it's, I can't say the whole site. There are parts of their, But what was interesting to me is our guide.
Was black, white?
He was white. He was a white descendant of Afrikaners.
Okay.
And he was very commanding. And there was a time, and he would talk to the black, a lot of the black people that serviced us on our trip, and he would talk what I considered to be very condescending toward them. And I said something to him. I said, I'm a little offended at the way you're talking to these people. And boy, did I get it. Because he said, who are you to criticize me for the way I talk to black people? You don't understand our culture. We're just 20 years out of apartheid. Your society's racist. We got into this whole political debate about the races and about Americans' perceptions of them. And it was interesting to me because I really did consider him entirely racist, but then the way he was explaining it to me, I guess it made me change my perception a little bit. It's just the way that they are. You know something?
We live in the United States in glass houses. We torture, we condemn other people for torturing. We're racist in many deep ways. We condemn other people for racism. And the thing is that we still think of ourselves as a non-torturing country and as a non-racist country. Right. And it's sort of like until somebody in a foreign culture holds up the mirror.
Exactly. That's exactly what he was doing. He said, I grew up on a farm, and we had a lot of black people working on our farm, and I was friends with them. And, this is just the way you have to talk to people that serve you. And so I guess it just sort of colored my opinion of myself and how I see things.
You know something? I read a touching story one time about a Chinese maid whose her children were starving and how indifferent her Chinese employer was. And I was very judgmental. And I think, what do I know about the people who helped me clean my house?
Right. Absolutely.
I'm not going into their houses and saying, how can I help you and what problems do you have?
Right.
And at the time, I remember being so judgmental. Yeah, that's one of the benefits of travel.
Right. Well, what he said to me? He goes, when we were driving one day, and all the road workers are black. All the people that do a lot of the service jobs are black.
Right.
And he says to me, Nikki, in the United States, do black people clean the roads? And I thought what a strange question. I said, no, they're all different races who clean the roads. And he said, oh. It just, I think, we're just at a different place here in the United States about how we talk about race.
Right.
And think about it.
Think about race, yeah. Whereas there, it's right in their face.
Exactly.
And you went into one of these townships on a evening out, right?
Yes.
Natabe took you?
Natabe took. I said, you have to take me out. I want to see what the nightlife is in one of these places. And I I tend to be a little bit of a hypochondriac, and I had read a lot of stories about South Africa and the townships, and all the stories, the AP stories, everything being reported back to us here was about the murder rate.
And would keep white people out of the townships.
Right, and this
tourists.
was before the World Cup really, this was before the World Cup really started to paint
It was
a different
last
picture
February,
of South
right?
Africa. Right.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
a lot of the media shifted a little bit to sort of get people to South Africa. But I had just been reading about the murder rate, so I was a little afraid. I had a little bit, okay, I'm going to go out to this township. I don't know what's going to happen. And we had been driving. It was a Saturday night, and we had been driving. It was kind of late at night, and we were looking for somewhere that was open. And we finally, all the bars, they're called shebeens, and they are run out of people's houses. So they pack them in. So we pulled up, and it was like a car park. There were, a good 100 cars there. I mean, it was crazy.
Old broken down cars, new what?
No, they were
Like an American parking lot.
Yeah. And, we get out of the car, and I can immediately feel the heat of the stairs, people staring at me. And then we got in, and it's just a sea of black faces, and there, here I am, the white girl, the American girl, and
the only white there.
The only white there, and I finally felt like what it was like to be a real minority where you are. Right. And there was so much, people were grabbing at me, the women especially, they were grabbing at me, and they wanted to, and at first I was like, what's going on, and I realized they were just curious, and they were excited, and especially excited to show me how to dance, because, they love, the women I met, just you could feel that they loved to dance. And so they would challenge me, several points during the night. These women in a group would come up to me and say, we want to show you how to dance. And then they would get around me and start, moving. And
you were to imitate them, right?
I was to imitate them. They wanted me
And was Natabi with you, or were you on?
She was looking on.
Keeping an eye.
Yes.
Yeah.
Kind of with sort of a faint, a smile on her face, kind of laughing. And found out I couldn't move my body like they could, I think I'm a little uptight in terms of how I move.
And have you taken aerobics? Are you physically fit, do you think?
Yeah, I run.
Oh, okay.
But it's just a different way that they move, their bodies just kind of just move in a different way that I do a little of this, I think they were just really curious.
And so did they ridicule you, or did they laugh with you, or?
Yeah, I think they were, I didn't feel like they were ridiculing me. I felt like they were, excited.
Wow, look, this one can't do what we do, right? Yeah, that would be an interesting thing to discover.
Right.
If they didn't know many white people.
I think they were excited for some, to be sharing in the music with someone, I guess a white person.
And did any men ask you to dance?
No. That's the funny thing, no. Mm-mm.
But women danced with women, so?
Yeah.
It was just going out and dance, right?
It was a dance night with your girl, it's like what we do here.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And then one woman did it was very, very, a little too curious. She got in my face, and that was a little much. But overall, it was a really neat night, and I'll never forget it. It was great.
And there was no violence, or?
No.
No.
Oh, no.
Just?
No. Just having a good time out. Yeah.
Right.
But you would walk into the shebeens, and they would say, they would say, leave your weapons at the door, pretty much. Leave your, like, one of those cross signs with a gun, That was a little,
We're going to be having it here, only it'll be, now that we've got such loose gun laws, it'll be bring your gun in.
Yeah, right.
You can take it in a national park, take it to kids' parties,
right.
Anywhere you want, you can take your gun. Do they have freedom of the press?
I think definitely compared to other African nations, by far, South Africa is way ahead of the game. But I think there's legislation now that I heard about last week that they're trying to put more controls on the press. They have a lot of independently run news organizations in South Africa.
This wasn't owned by a big corporation like the Marblehead paper.
It's
Seems
a
local.
CNC.
But
Yeah, it is owned by a huge corporation, News
Yeah.
24, which is,
Yeah.
I think, one of the biggest.
Which
news-
is a Murdoch. I think it's a Murdoch.
Is it? Yeah. Well, they definitely have more freedom than a lot of their neighbors do.
Yes. Oh, yeah. And people were concerned about AIDS, including Natabe, right?
Yeah. Yeah. As AIDS is probably one of the biggest problems facing their country. I think it's about 20% of their population has AIDS, which, you can think of that number and say, okay, that seems like a lot, but until you go to the country and talk to people and how it's affecting them, you really feel the weight of what that means. Natabe, like I said, she's just like me. She's she has a husband. She's very secure in her life and career, and she's a strong woman, but this brings her to her knees, the idea of getting AIDS and HIV. Her aunt died of AIDS. Her family did not know her aunt had AIDS until she was dying, which was really scary to her.
That there could be this like secret population.
Right. And
who's also not getting any care, right?
Right. And I think a lot of her peers, I don't think that they talk about it and they think about it. I know the United States has poured millions of dollars into AIDS awareness in Africa, but I think that there's some disconnect in the way.
Well, President Zuma doesn't seem to think it's a problem, right?
Right. He had unprotected sex with a woman with HIV and said publicly that he wasn't worried about getting HIV because he had taken a shower. And so when your political leaders are sending you that message.
And didn't he brag about how many women?
Yeah.
He's the lover, not a leader, right, in a way.
Right. But now I think in the last year they've had a lot of AIDS awareness. They're trying to, I think he took an HIV test recently, which he said was negative, and I think he's trying to change that a little bit within his country. But for Natabe, she's very critical of that administration in the way that the leaders sort of characterize the problem.
And even though her husband seemed like a very nice person to you, there's kind of a culture of
promiscuity.
Yeah.
Yep. It seems to me, again, from my perspective, it seems like a very male-dominated, more so male-dominated culture, and among some of the tribal groups, and it just seems like there's less chance that they'll be using condoms. I think that we think of AIDS here as sort of, since the 80s, since the epidemic hit, we've been the public awareness campaigns, and I think people are talking about it and afraid of it so much that they're willing to protect themselves. And I think that, and I'm talking in general here, I can't speak for everybody, but I think that there's not that fear there, and I think that's the problem.
Oh, it's very different. Here, the norm is monogamy, and yet, of course, it's broken a million times a day, but just the same, the ideal or the standard people are trying to measure up to is to be faithful. And there, to be a man spreading your seed, is sort of the ideal. And to settle into monogamy just because of AIDS, it's like the opposite pressures are on the men.
Yeah. It's such a new problem, too, for I guess, relatively new problem in Africa.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. It does take time. We want, like Obama, to solve all the problems in the first year. But, I mean, a thing like changing an attitude toward AIDS or toward male promiscuity, that's a big, hard thing.
Yeah. One of the things I've heard is that, in Africa where there's so many other diseases and problems, that it's not singled out as the problem.
Oh,
okay.
They got malaria.
It's another thing.
All right, so you came back, and what did you learn?
Well, I learned that, don't always believe what you read in the media, about a place or about people.
Especially fear engendering stuff that you read.
Yes, I think that I'm not going to pretend that I am a deeply cultured person, but when I think any trip you do changes your life in some way, and this definitely changed my life. I had so many people tell me in my life, don't go, why would you go to Africa? It's just war and poverty and, murdering populations, and, and it really was.
And danger.
And danger.
Yeah.
And it's not, of course, the way I traveled, I was safe and there were protections. But
you weren't behind a gate either. You weren't in one gated community after another.
Right. And I think the more people learn about Africa, I think it's certainly a destination that everybody should experience. It's an unbelievable place.
So now you're still in touch with Natabe,
yes.
A new friend.
A new friend. She's like my sister, my African sister. She's a really kindred spirit. It's hard not to like her, but yeah, I hope, we were talking about trying to connect the township that her mother-in-law lives in with a sister city on the North Shore, so we can maybe bring some resources, because some of the kids, like I said, in the news that week when I was there, they had some drownings. These little girls were walking home from school and drowned in the ditches because there's no infrastructure in some of these townships. So to bring some awareness of that, I think is important.
Well, thank you so much, Nikki.
Yes, thank you.
I hope Rotary brings someone from Indonesia next or whatever, and you can...
Thank you, yes, if any Rotarians are out there.
So thanks for coming. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. It's fun.
Cause an idea, whose time has come, cannot be stopped by anyone. Plant your seeds in fertile ground. There ain't nothing gonna keep it down. Oh, we can do it. Yes, we can. We can change things throughout the land. But we all must lend a hand. We can do it. Oh, yes, we can. We can do it. Yes, we can. We can change things throughout the land. But we all